dictionary definition of music is the art of arranging sounds in time through the elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Low Pass Filter is a show about the nature of this thing we call music, how it functions in people's lives, how it's contextualized by society, and why we find certain music meaningful. This is Low Pass Filter. Hello, and welcome to Low Pass Filter. This is a show about the nature of this thing we call music. My name is Mateo Noche, and I'm joined by LPF co-host Bandon Wayne. Hey, Bandon.
What's up? How's it going, Matt?
It's going great. Yeah, glad to be back for our sophomore effort. This is our second show, so I'm pretty excited about it. Why don't you explain the concept of our show today?
Okay, well, you gave me the choice for the second episode, and I guess my mind kind of went to sort of a linear continuation from the previous concept, the topic of last episode. So I thought about the music that was the first music I considered my own music outside of what I was exposed to by my parents or any other person in my family. When I started to go out and find my own music, my own interest in music and what I gravitated towards and ultimately started buying with, I guess, allowance money. And in my era, it was cassette tapes. So I thought that would be a good continuation and kind of a building point for where we're going to end up going in our musical conversations.
Yeah, and absolutely. I should say, because of the difference in our ages, I think we're probably 10 or so years apart. My go-to thing that I spent my allowance on, in addition to buying, models and gum and whatever, was singles. And I didn't get a lot. I'm thoroughly middle-class background, so I'm not claiming poverty or anything else. But I sort of had parents of the Depression, and they're pretty tight with the money that they gave me to go out and buy stuff. So I never really got a lot of money to buy stuff with. So as a consequence, I bought like singles, 7-inch singles. The little piece of plastic with a hole that some of us know about, and also cutouts, which I'm sure you know all about, things that were in the bargain bin, So a lot of the first things I bought were just things that I could afford, which really wasn't that much, even though I'm sure an album was like $3 or $4 or $5 or whatever it was at the time. That was a lot of money to a kid, really.
Indeed. I was going to say, I certainly bought a lot of gum myself. Yeah, it's hard to remember how I actually afforded cassette tapes based on whatever allowance I was given. Maybe I saved up 2 weeks worth of allowance or something like that. I think cassettes for me at that time were probably in the $3 to $5 range or something.
Yeah.
This would have been 1980, 85, 86 for me.
So why don't you kick us off with your first thing? And I see that you're very hip hop, early rap artist heavy, but which was really, that stuff was really sparking up in the early 80s. So why don't you talk a little bit about your first things that you went out and bought with your hard-earned cash?
Indeed, yeah. At that time, it probably wasn't earned. I think I had to start earning it after a little while. So we talked on the episode previously about things that we heard early on in life that sparked our imagination and our interest in music. And so my parents around 1983 and 1984 were for whatever reason interested in a lot of the kind of new wave pop stuff that was coming out on MTV, even though I don't believe we were watching MTV quite yet. But so they gravitated towards the Police and Talking Heads and Tears for Fears and that stuff. And I was loving that, and that stuff was really foundational. But I think around the summer of 1984, sometime during that year, 2 films came out that I got so excited about. And that was Beat Street and then Breakin'. And I think the spark of interest in that was directly a result of Michael Jackson's Thriller and seeing him do the moonwalk, and that kind of sparking this cultural phenomenon around break dancing and other dance forms associated with that, like popping and locking. So, I'm 10 years old and going with friends to see those movies without the parents, and I was just extremely captured by that stuff, and that led to me wanting to dance like that as well. So it was a combination of wanting that music because that was the music to dance to, but being very geared towards music, being very interested in the musicality. The music itself was quite exciting and inspiring, and I became literally obsessed, as I do with most cultural things that I get into. So I started looking for those artists that were heard in the soundtracks of those films, and then that led to finding other stuff, and so I think at that time the easiest way to get some of those artists were label compilations, and of course about all of those kinds of records and tapes, but I think K-Tel Records and Priority Records were putting out some of these artists. There weren't too many labels for hip hop and rap music at that time. There was Sugar Hill Records, Tommy Boy Records. That was a huge one. And there was actually an album that was a compilation of singles that had come out on Tommy Boy Records. And that was the label that put out Africa Bambaataa. And so even though there were other major songs that I was drawn to, Planet Rock by Africa Bambaataa was probably the most exciting, most sort of otherworldly sound that was associated with the musical style that was called hip hop at that time.
We break in to say that Africa was one of the originators of breakbeat DJing. It was a whole new thing. Breakbeat DJing was a whole new thing. The getting 2 records up on a turntable, the same record often, and spinning one and then spinning the next one into that.
Yes.
And then rapping happened over that, or just keeping the party going with that same beat over and over again. And that was it.
Yes.
He was the originator of that whole concept.
He almost was. He was right there at the very beginning. The ultimate originator, as historically credited, is DJ Kool Herc. Right. He was considered the first one to double up the turntables. He was an immigrant from Jamaica, and he brought their style of party rocking. But Africa Bambaataa was right there at the beginning of it, and I think essentially Bambaataa is kind of credited with coining the term hip hop and pioneering the style, the sort of cultural attitude that became known as hip hop.
Well, my spies tell me that it was Cowboy Keith from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five who actually came up with the hip hop.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people laying claim to various, you know, firsts.
Yes, that he could have been the one who came up with that terminology. Bambaataa was, you know, believing in the sort of culture as an alternative to other things in the inner cities, and so his concept of love, peace, unity, and having fun, and the four elements of hip hop. So maybe, you know, there were other people certainly involved, but Bambaataa was kind of trying to redirect the youth away from gang activity and other kind of harmful activities, and get people together under the umbrella of music and dance and art. So yeah, and those are all things that I didn't understand initially at the time. Over here in Northern California, when New York City and the Bronx was the birthplace of that stuff. So I became informed over the years subsequent to that, but just the vibe of it, the look of the fashion and the visual impact of watching people dance in that way was just overwhelmingly infectious to me. So it all stemmed from that.
Whole hip hop thing came out of street parties, you know, in Hollis, Queens, and you know, where they would jack open a light post, you know, and use the power out of that, and just, you know, do parties in the middle of the street, and there'd be hundreds of people out there dancing, and
Yeah,
all night long, you know, and so
quite incredible.
Quite a vibrant scene at the time.
I can only imagine. Of course, even if I had been there of the right age, who knows if I would have been cool enough to be hip to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was involved in a couple of musical groups around, you know, the mid to early 80s. And we actually, you know, we heard Curtis Blow doing The Break, you know, and we were super, super influenced by that. And us in our white guy kind of way, we tried to, you know, kind of very much rip off and emulate that. And the results are pretty embarrassing, but we were hip to it, and you know, at least, and you know, kind of pre Madison Avenue, where Madison Avenue kind of came in and for a while there and took over the whole rap scene, or they co-opted it, if you will, and you started hearing rap in McDonald's commercials and selling cars and stuff like that. But you know, and then, but rap, I think at the time was, and the hip hop culture different than we think of it today. It was more party oriented, more good times oriented, I think, in a lot of ways, more dance oriented, like you were talking about. And we really didn't get into serious topical rap groups like NWA and you know, other groups like that came along until the 90s, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm glad you made that point. I mean, I don't want to take this off too much into those details, but that's always kind of bothered me in a way, that the perception of hip hop is that it was always a political message oriented art form, or that it was just from one group of people's perspective. Not to take away anything from the majority of those artists who who contributed the most to hip hop and rap, but it was at the beginning multicultural. It really was about a relief from the dark side of life in inner city life. And really, as far as I know, The Message by Grandmaster Flash is the first and only song of that era that really kind of dealt with those darker issues. Early on, the MCs that were rapping over the breaks were toasting, they were boasting, they were talking about having fun. And it's really true. It's all there historically, and it wasn't until you got artists like Public Enemy and NWA that really started to develop this idea of rap music being a vehicle to report about real struggles, economic, racial, political. So there's nothing wrong with that, and it evolved that way, and it makes a lot of sense. It's a perfect art form for that. But the early days, and especially the original musicality of it was geared towards the dancers. The rappers initially were they were the MCs. They were hosting the party. And that evolved on its own course to become rapping, or the musical style called rap. But initially, the music was dropped for the dancers and the party goers who wanted to get live at the party. And that idea of juggling two records and continuing those breaks for an extended period of time, I mean, if you think about it, that's so the dancers could keep dancing, because it was those breaks in the songs that got the dancers or the dance floor completely hyped up. And so that wasn't something I was extremely conscious of at the time, but where I came into it, it still was about that aspect. It was dance music. It was party music, but it was not like anything you'd ever heard before. It wasn't disco. It wasn't funk. It incorporated those elements, but it was also kind of art and punk and renegade and something completely new. So stuff like Africa Bambaataa, Johns and Crew, Nucleus. Those are artists that sounded otherworldly to me, and as they would say back then, completely fresh. So that's what got me excited initially.
Well, I should mention at this point, we're going to take a break here in just a minute, but I should mention that we'll have our Spotify playlists in the description below. So if you want to listen to some of these artists as we're talking about them, you can just click on them and listen along with us. So at this point, we're going to take a little break, and we'll be back after this. Okay, welcome back to Low Pass Filter, and we're talking about the first music that we personalized, the first music that we plunked down our hard-earned money for as young people. And so my whole stuff kind of came about 10 years or so before yours. And the ones I wanted to mention is I have two that kind of relate to each other, and having a lot to do with the times that they were released. And the first one is a song by Oliver, who is I always thought was but actually it was an American, and had a song called "Good Morning Starshine."
Okay.
We talked about this last week about how I was attracted to things that were strange, in songs and weird musical phrases or weird vocal phrases. And this one had one that was pretty strange. It went something like glibby glob gloopy nibby noppy noopy la la lolo sabi sibi saba nobi abi daba lilo lolo. It goes on from there, but it was kind of the kind of thing that I was into back then. But the event I think that I peg it to was this was released in July of 1969, and just a few days before the moon landing. So songs having to do with space and having to do with the moon, with that sort of thing, were particularly attractive to me. So I went out and I bought the single. I think it cost me 89 cents or something. And then the other one that I also got was Space Oddity. David Bowie's, his first hit single, coming off of a failed first record that was sort of dance hall-ish. It was he was still searching around for his style. But this song, Space Oddity, came out about an astronaut, or was it a junkie? We don't know. We're not. He says that Major Tom's a junkie, so maybe he is a junkie, and he's not really out in space, but he's floating in his tin can. But that sort of really resonated with me around the actions that were going on in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And just sort of digging into this record, they had hired Tony Visconti, who did a lot of records with Bowie, almost all of them, I think, really. But he hated the song. He hated it so much that he gave it to another engineer to record and produce because he just couldn't stand it. And of course, he ended up producing the rest of the record, the rest of that second Bowie record. But he couldn't take this song. So he gave it to this guy named Gus to produce and record, and it turned out to be, of course, his first hit.
That's really interesting, especially since Visconti went on to do numerous albums with him, and you think of the Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars album.
Oh yeah.
Did Visconti have sort of a change of mind in a sense?
I don't know about that. I just, from what I understand, he did not like the song, and he just couldn't get behind it, so he gave it to someone else.
Yeah.
Interesting lineup on that. Rick Wakeman, who you might know is a guy who was in Yes, actually played on a lot of stuff, on a lot of Bowie stuff, and some really great. There's a cover song, I think it's on Aladdin Sane, called covering the Rolling Stones' Let's Spend the Night Together, which the piano break is just a monster, right? It's just crazy. Yeah. But what I wanted to mention about Bowie was, I'm sorry for dipping out of the picture here, was, at the time, you could get beaten up for carrying a David Bowie record to school. I know people that were actually beaten up for carrying a record like this around because of David Bowie's I don't know, I don't want to say questionable, but his androgyny, his what was his sexuality, and so if you associated yourself with David Bowie around that time, it was a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Of course, he was huge after, and then a lot of those same people who were beating people up for carrying around Bowie records, professed to be his biggest fan, but he was just something really new on the scene, and like nothing else really that was on the radio at the time.
Yeah. That's such a cool song to be one of your first memories within the context of this topic, you know, something that you gravitated towards on your own. I suppose you could say all eras have significance like that, but to me, that's an amazing time to discover an artist such as David Bowie. You were there for that. I think that's really cool, and it's also cool that song was using the current sort of advancement of
zeitgeist.
Yes, something so monumental as jettisoning from planet Earth into space, which, you know, was referred to as the space race. To use that as a metaphor for dealing with, you know, stuff like drug use or feeling like an outsider and struggling to deal with your own personal existence, I suppose.
Yeah. So I see you've got Run DMC on your list here.
Yeah, you know, Run DMC comes a little bit after some of this other stuff, but of course the playlist will be posted and people can see that. And I think I mentioned a couple other artists in there, but yeah, Run DMC was really the first artist of this new idea of rap music being, and not just, you know, sort of pioneers of rap, but really one of the first commercially successful. We know the Sugar Hill Gang with Rapper's Delight was the first commercially released rap single, as they might refer to it. But it was really Run DMC coming along, and their biggest breakthrough record was Raising Hell. But they had 2 albums before that, and so in that sphere of hip hop and early rap, some of us knew about some of those songs like Sucker MCs and Rock Box and Hard Times. So I was catching on to that right at that time, and you know, I suppose I got to see some of their early videos, maybe even before MTV. I'm not sure, because we saw videos on Night Flight as well, and you didn't have to have a cable subscription to see Night Flight. So somehow I was seeing like the video for Rock Box. And yeah, I mean, to me, nothing was cooler than Run DMC at that time.
Yeah, it's got Like That on there.
Oh, yes, that's right. It's Like That. Yep.
It's still one of the big selling singles of all times.
Wow.
That was a huge record. And, you know, you mentioned MTV, of course. At the time, there was the whole color line thing with MTV, where it was, you know, basically, you know, white as white can be. And, you know, it wasn't until, you know, Michael Jackson sort of broke that color line.
Yeah.
He was, you know, he had the star power to make them start playing other artists. And so, of course, Run DMC, you know, came along. And then, of course, their collaboration with Aerosmith. It's too bad that, you know, they had to, you know, it took them collaborating with a white rock band, you know, to make them, you know, put them into people's consciousness. But that really, I think, broke open MTV's sort of color line. I won't say and, but they're kind of penchant for not putting black artists on MTV.
Indeed, that actually connects back to David Bowie as well, because he boldly called them out on that during an MTV interview. I don't know if that was preceding things starting to change, or maybe kind of in the middle of it, but he definitely noted that. Yeah, and of course Michael Jackson. You know, it's sad that sometimes those changes occur because of making money. I mean, if MTV didn't pick up on that, you know, who knows where they would have ended up. Michael Jackson was huge and making concept videos and had the whole world's attention. So yeah, I recently watched a documentary about the early days of MTV, and they discussed that. And some people tried to play it off as not a conscious choice. Others kind of admitted that yes, it was some kind of narrow-mindedness, to put it in a mild way, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, this makes a neat segue because two of the bands, if you want to call them that I had on my list, or were made for TV. One is this band called the Partridge Family. The other one, of course, the Prefab Four, as they called them at the time, the Monkees.
Yep.
And we just lost Mike Nesmith here a day or so ago, which is the really terrible thing to have happen. But, you know, it's just life, I guess. But those two things, those two, I don't know what you want to call them. Are they groups? Were they really groups? I don't know. I think the Monkees sort of evolved into a real group after they threw off Don Kirshner and started making their own records and playing their own instruments and stuff. But of course, the Partridge Family was Shirley Jones, who was a Broadway star, and you know, she was in South Pacific, I think it was, in Oklahoma, maybe was what she was in, and her son David Cassidy. You know, pick up any Tiger Beat magazine of that era, you know, and you'll find him on there. Made these, you know, pop records that were actually, and this brought home to me, they were actually contemporaneous with the Beatles. It kind of blew my mind that they were all sort of in the tail end of the Beatles era. You would think of them being something completely separate and you know, in a different era, but they really weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember my sister and I fighting over the poster from the Partridge Family album. I think she might have won that fight, but the Monkees, I think, were a whole another thing. It's had great people writing for them, Brill building artists, Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil wrote records for them, Livingston and Livingston, Jay Livingston, Harry Nielsen, you know, so they had, you know, they had like huge power, songwriting power behind them. And also had a weird kind of you know, they were in the same world as the Beatles. Their Mike Nesmith, that we mentioned before, was at the day a day in the life recording session, and can be seen in the promotional film for that. And you know, Mickey Dolenz, I think, asked John Lennon, you know, he sort of apologetically, you know, sorry for ripping off your whole thing, you know, and you know, do you hate us? You know, I think he asked him, and he was like, no, I think you're like the best thing since the Marx Brothers. You know, he said I never missed your shows. You know, so wow. They had the full approval of the Beatles, who they're often compared to. You know, but they're compared to a lot of different bands of the time. I mean, I think of like the Hollies. They sound, you know, some, depending on what song they were doing, they sounded like a lot of different bands at the time. But I thought there was at the time I went out and bought Pisces, Aquarius, and Jones, you know, and played it over and over again. So I have my playlist. I have For Pete's Sake, which was the closing credit title credit closing for the show.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great. it's a relevant topic right now because Michael Nesmith did just pass away. You probably know more about the Monkees than I do. I have some friends who are much more obsessive about them. So I don't know all of the complete picture of how legitimate the Monkees were as their own band. But I look at it like, even if they were put together for a television show, even if, well, it's true that so many other artists were writing the material, at least early on. And then, of course, other musicians were performing a lot of that material, even though Michael could play and the other members were picking up on their respective instruments, I suppose. But I think ultimately the difference between them and the Partridge Family as a legitimate group is that the Monkees, I think, truly bought into the culture that they were part of. I think they believe, I shouldn't say bought into, I think they believed in, the kind of counterculture of the time, psychedelic pop music, being heads was the term. They even made a film called Head, and they were hanging out with a lot of other hip people. And, like where the Partridge Family has some pretty good pop music, stuff I would enjoy listening to, the Monkees have some incredible songs and, great pop songs, great kind of weird psychedelic songs. And you'll find that most people who have a deep love of a lot of different kinds of music regard the Monkees as great. I have most of their records in my collection, and songs that would come to my mind would be like Daily Nightly, or a weird one called Auntie Griselda, stuff like that. That it doesn't even really matter if they didn't play all the music or wrote every bit of those songs. They were just part of an idea, I suppose. That was great.
You mentioned the movie Head, of course. It's directed by Frank Zappa.
There you go. Yeah.
So, yeah, they had some cred,
And Ringo Starr was hanging out, and they probably had people from the Wrecking Crew helping record stuff. And
absolutely, those first all the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the Wrecking Crew documentary out there, go watch it right now, and you'll see how much music of the 60s and early 70s was made by a very small group of people. How many bands didn't play their own instruments, often much to their own chagrin. They want to play their own instruments, but they're like, no, we got the Wrecking Crew. Don't worry.
Yeah. To interject, like, take, we're going off on a sideline here, but take Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Most people think that's this magical, amazing work of art by the Beach Boys. And nothing should be taken away from the Beach Boys. Their 5-part vocal harmonies are incredible. Brian Wilson was an incredible songwriter, along with his brothers, but they didn't record all of that music. And when you watch the documentary, one of the things they talk about is that sometimes the Wrecking Crew was used just to expedite the process of recording the music. So sometimes the bands could have accomplished it on their own, but it would have taken 10 times as long.
Yeah.
And so they would bring in members of the Wrecking Crew to we got to just knock this out. Time is money. We're spending big bucks on studio time.
Yeah,
So,
we shouldn't go too far down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, for sure.
I got, you probably have this too, or have access to it, the Smile sessions.
Yeah.
Which is basically Brian Wilson directing the Wrecking Crew to make the record Smile, which finally got made just a few years ago. It finally got completed in the way that he wanted it to be completed.
Yeah.
But it's it just fascinating listening to him, directing people and giving them parts, and Carol Kay and Hal Blaine and Tommy Tedesco and all these fabulous people. Let's jump back to your list, and I see you got LL Cool J in there.
Yeah. So, as far as the early evolution of rap into kind of what kind of took over the hip hop culture in a sense, I kind of ended with LL Cool J. From there, you could go to the Beastie Boys, and you also had artists like Houdini and UTFO, and many others. But I think that next to Run DMC, LL Cool J was huge. And of course, they were all on well, Run DMC didn't start out on Def Jam Records, but they were all touring together, and Run's brother, Russell Simmons, starts Def Jam, and so LL Cool J was one of the first superstars of the new rap style, and that was huge to me. I Can't Live Without My Radio, from the debut album called Radio.
Right.
And yeah, that was kind of the culmination of my interest kind of over a year's time, I suppose, going from the early dance-oriented hip-hop sounds into just appreciating the art of rap and the image and attitude of these new rap artists. And of course, it goes on from there. But I took a little detour once I got to about 12.
Yeah.
Got into heavy metal. But yeah, so I mentioned a few other artist names, but Run DMC and LL Cool J, definitely the big stars.
Yeah, and good stuff. Well, we're going to take another break. We'll be back in a minute. Just to remind you that you're listening to or watching Low Pass Filter with Bandon Wayne and Mateo Noche, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, welcome back to Low Pass Filter, and I've got a couple here. This kind of also, they're personal to me because in the 5th grade I took up the trumpet. So I was in the elementary school band playing trumpet, and so anything having to do with brass was really on my radar. Of course, at the time I was terrible, and I remained terrible for quite a while on the instrument. I remember watching my friend Larry Cole, who sat next to me, and when he would press down a valve, I would press down a valve, and when he would let the valve up, I'd let the valve up. So that was that was how I played the trumpet. But anyway, there was a lot of jazz rock bands happening at the time, and two of the biggest ones were Blood, Sweat, and Tears, who started off by the band as a project by this guy named Al Cooper, who a lot of people know as the guy that played the organ for Bob Dylan on a hit song. Anyway, there was a song called Spinning Wheel, What Goes Up Must Come Down. And just another one of those things where it had an odd break in it. It had an odd brass break and kind of a little weird tacked on thing at the end. Then They got started in 1967. Al Cooper either left or was jettisoned from the band, and they brought on this guy named David Clayton Thomas, who really went on to have all of their hits, I would say. But they were one of the first bands that did what they called at the time jazz rock.
Interesting.
Not to be confused with jazz fusion. Whole different thing. But anyway, they brought a lot of pop rock, R&B flavors into what they did. I have this record here. It's called BS&T 4. This actually was my sister's record. She got it for Christmas, and this is how I kind of got into the band. There's a song on here called Lisa, Listen to Me, which was sort of a minor hit at the time. And my sister's name was Lisa, so of course she gravitated towards the song because, kind of like the Band on the Run thing, she that was my song, So, but they did kinds of styles. They covered Billie Holiday songs, Eric Satie, very cerebral Monk, Prokofiev, very, very out there and very complex arrangements, very tight, complex arrangements, and something that a fifth grader trumpet player could aspire to. And then, of course, the other band that got to be huge was Chicago. And so they were another very adventurous band that did a lot of interesting time signatures, a lot of complex jazz rock arrangements, some very, very heavy songs too. Terry Kath, who was their guitar player, did a lot of very heavy guitar songs that they're not known for, of course. But the song I have here is 25 or 6 to 4, which is kind of a rocker song with horns. And of course, then after he was tragically killed, they went on to suck.
Thanks to
Pete Cetera.
Yeah.
Even mention his name because he should burn in hell, basically, for taking a perfectly good rock band and turning it into this kind of marshmallowy soft rock schlock. But
I feel you. I wouldn't challenge you on that, although I sort of subcategorize that schlock into a style of music that I actually really appreciate. I liked the song "Stay the Night" in the mid '80s when I was a kid, but yeah, it is schmaltzy. It is nothing like the original Chicago. So I give you that. I could understand being quite disappointed in what they became. 25. What is it? 25 or 6 to 4.
Yeah.
That song is dope. That song rules. The first Chicago song I ever heard that turned me on was, of course, "I'm a Man."
Yeah.
Monster funk jam that, kind of hearkening back to the hip hop conversation. That's a song that breakers could dance to. The break in that.
Stevie Winwood cover.
Oh, okay. Yep. You blew my mind talking about Blood, Sweat, and Tears and I kind of thought for a long time that I had an aversion to that band. Everything you've described about them was not what I thought they were growing up as a kid. Maybe it was just from hearing the song "Spinning Wheel" a lot, and I had a different impression. But I do know that a handful of years ago, I finally listened to their debut album and found that to be wonderful. So I think I need to explore Blood, Sweat, and Tears a lot more.
Yeah, the record that I held up, of course, I think the hit off that was a song called "Go Down Gamblin'," which is just amazing. It's just so aggressive and just so off the hook, it's got this guitar solo by David Clayton Thomas, who I didn't even realize was the guitar player in the band, that just absolutely rips. And there's a lot of other things on there that no one's ever heard, that are just really tastefully arranged, beautiful, almost heartrendingly beautiful songs, So yeah, a lot to recommend that particular band, not just Spinning Wheel, which of course was their hit,
Yes.
By the way, I should mention Al Cooper absolutely hates David Clayton Thomas and just completely ripped him a new one, saying the man has absolutely no soul, which I don't get really, but I think he was bitter because they had all their success after he left. But what are you going to do?
Wow. Yeah, and the artist that you mentioned that they covered, no one ever exposed me to that. I never thought about that. That's amazing. I think that song Spinning Wheel, I kind of associated along with artists like Three Dog Night or something.
It was a pop song. There's this whole, for me, there's a kind of I've gotten over this, but there's a bias against things that, of course, the radio doesn't really matter that much anymore, but at the time, things would get played to death, Yeah. And as much as you liked it, you just couldn't stand to hear it one more time, right? And that's one of those songs that for the longest time, it's just, I loved it originally, but it just got played off the hook like a lot of things did on the radio at the time. And it's just like it would come on, I'd have to turn it off because it's just like, I can't stand to hear this song one more time. Just, come on, pick something else, But that's the way it works. That's a personal bugaboo. So.
Yeah, that's cool.
So what else did you have on your list?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm really curious about more of your stuff. So I had a couple tracks that were on the Breakin' soundtrack. One of them that blew me away, I think this would be good to mention because we were talking about the evolution from hip hop into the more sort of popular rap focus. A song called Reckless that's credited here to Chris the Glove Taylor, who was a DJ who didn't garner as much fame as Grandmaster Flash and some others. However, that track, you may recall, features Ice-T on the vocals before Ice-T became associated with this sort of gangster rap. He was featured in the film on stage at the club where they danced, and it was a style of rapping that only existed up till that point. Kind of things started to change away from that. It also was coming from the West Coast as opposed to the East Coast. So Beat Street was a film that focused on the East Coast scene, and Breakin' was all about the West Coast. It was set around Venice Beach and other parts of LA. And so I was turned on by both of those for different elements, I suppose, because there was some very distinct differences. The dancers in Breakin' weren't break dancing. They were doing more what was called poppin' and lockin'. And their fashion sense was completely different. So yeah, just the soundtrack to Breakin' was huge for me, but so was the soundtrack to Beat Street. My playlist has Jam on It by Nucleus, and I think that's a song that probably still resonates a lot today. Like, I think if most people heard it, come on, they would recognize it. It was a very almost novelty sounding song, but the group nucleus itself was really kind of what I refer to as electro funk, or kind of space funk. But that song got associated with the hip hop culture. And yeah, I got Freaks Come Out at Night by Houdini. That's a song that even people who aren't completely hip to the culture probably have heard. Kind of can apply to any era. The freaky people come out at night, right? People that want to party and get live. So, yeah, I think that's most of my list covered, and people can go and sample it. It's all excellent music, so please do go check it out.
Yeah, so I just short. We got about another 10 minutes or so. So I'll just run through some of the things that I had. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, the record Deja Vu was huge. Played that off the hook. But the song Carry On, which was really that rock and roll choir boy, heavy vocal thing, very spacey, very psychedelic, was something that really resonated with me off of that record. There was a band called The Stories that had a called Brother Louie.
Yeah.
Which was actually, I didn't realize this until I started researching this, was actually from a band called Hot Chocolate.
Okay.
So they were covering that song, which I never did till a day or two ago when I started looking into it. But you mentioned the K-Tel compilations. And so one of the K-Tel compilations I had was had Steeler's Wheel.
Oh, yeah.
Stuck in the Middle with You, which ended up showing up in Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs years later. The other artist that I really got turned on by was Harry Nilsson. So I have Jump Into the Fire off of Nilsson Schmilsson. I remember going to Music Plus and buying this particular record, which says it's a quadradisc. So there was quad, back. You guys there can look it up on Wikipedia. Citation needed about what quad was. But anyway, I don't know how I ended up with a quad version of Nilsson Schmilsson, but a lot of Beatles stuff, kind of tangents come in there. Ringo Starr played the drums on this. Herbie Flowers, which was kind of a Beatles hanger-oner, of course, produced by Richard Perry. And then, as I mentioned before, the things that had to do with space, Nilsson had a song called Spaceman, which also was a kind of a tie-in to the whole space race and space era. So,
oh, man.
Let me see what else I got here. I'll just go through really quick. Talk about funk. A song that I really like is a song called Funky Worm by the Ohio Players. And featured a Moog synthesizer, which you didn't hear a lot at the time. Something completely new. And it again plays into that thing of mine where, it's just like, that's different. And I gravitate towards those things that just sound different. But I will still play this song on my radio show. Sorry, but because it's kind of a novelty record. You were talking about novelty records, and the other one I want to throw in before we run out of time is England Swings by Roger Miller. So that the whole play into this, the Carnaby Street, swinging England scene at the time. I'm sure Roger had absolutely no idea what any of that was about, but didn't stop him from talking about it.
You just dropped a whole bunch of killer bombs that I would love to talk about, but I'll just briefly say Roger Miller can be as novelty as he wants. That guy is a genius, in my opinion. He could turn novelty into something meaningful. The Harry Nilsson track, at some point I became obsessed with, Jump Into the Fire specifically, but and he has so many. I'm a huge fan of Harry Nilsson.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'll just slip in here is Penny Lane.
Oh,
which was actually the B-side to Strawberry Fields Forever. There's a whole world in that song, right?
Oh.
And I love things that just like create a world, you know, and in 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes or however long it was, you know. So a song that can create a world in 3 minutes is a pretty good song, really. That's
just a beautiful sentiment in itself, and there are many songs that can do that, but they don't all do that, and when they do, it's so magical.
Well, that's about all the time that we have for the show this week. I want to thank Bandon for joining me again for show number 2 of Low Pass Filter. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified for future shows. You can contact us at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com and use the comments section to make suggestions about future topics. Well, we'll see you next time on Low Pass Filter. Bandon, thanks a lot, man.
Thank you so much, and thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks for watching Low Pass Filter. Contact the hosts at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified about future shows.